In the sprawling, silent suburbs of America, countless stories play out under the cold, indifferent glow of fluorescent lights. Most are mundane: a late-night craving, a forgotten ingredient, a desperate need for diapers. But some errands, born of quiet desperation in the loneliest hours, lead to places not found on any map. This is the story of David Miller, a burnt-out father whose simple mission for his sick daughter led him down a shortcut in a 24-hour supermarket. It was a shortcut that severed him from the world he knew, trapping him in a monument to consumerist despair, the grocery store aisle that never ends. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The summons came as a whisper in the dark, a gentle shake of his shoulder that felt like an earthquake. "Dave," his wife, Sarah, murmured, her voice frayed with worry. "Lily's fever is worse. It's 103. The doctor said to get the grape-flavored reductor. We're all out." David Miller peeled his face from the pillow, his body a leaden weight of exhaustion. A brutal 14-hour day at his architectural firm had bled into a restless, anxiety-ridden sleep. Spreadsheets and building codes still swirled behind his eyelids. He blinked, the numbers on his alarm clock glowing a hostile 3:17 a.m. Outside, the curated silence of their suburban street was absolute. Inside, the only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner and the faint, labored breaths of their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, from the room down the hall. "Okay," he mumbled, swinging his legs out of bed. The floor was cold. "Okay, I'm going." His mission was simple, a sacred quest in the gospel of parenthood. Get in, get the medicine, get out. The target was the Megamart, a colossal, soul-crushing big-box store 15 minutes away, the only place open at this godforsaken hour. It was a cathedral of consumerism, a place he actively despised, with its cavernous ceilings, aggressively cheerful branding, and the uncanny ability to make you feel completely alone in a space large enough to hold a jumbo jet. The drive was a hypnotic blur of empty streets and sleeping houses, each one a neat box filled with lives he could only imagine. The Megamart appeared suddenly, an oasis of glaring artificial light in the velvet darkness. Its parking lot was a vast, empty expanse of asphalt, his sedan the only vehicle in a sea of white-lined rectangles. For a moment, he felt like the last man on Earth. The automatic doors hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, welcoming him into a blast of refrigerated air that smelled of floor wax and refrigerated produce. The store was profoundly silent. The usual cacophony of shopping carts, screaming children, and tinny pop music was gone, replaced by the omnipresent, low-frequency hum of the building's nervous system, the freezers, the ventilation, the lights. The fluorescent tubes above cast a flat, shadowless glare on the impeccably polished linoleum, making the endless rows of products look like exhibits in a sterile museum. He was the sole visitor. He walked with purpose, his footsteps echoing unnervingly. His dread was a familiar companion in this place, a low-grade hum of anxiety that always accompanied his shopping trips. It was the feeling of being overwhelmed by choice, by the sheer volume of stuff, all of it screaming for his attention, promising a slightly better, easier, happier life for just $4.99. The pharmacy section, according to the directory, was at the far back right corner of the store, a journey that required navigating a dozen or more aisles. He started the trek, past towering displays of breakfast cereals and mountains of paper towels. He felt a familiar impatience prickle his skin. Lily was waiting. Sarah was waiting. Every second spent in this fluorescent purgatory felt like a failure. That's when he saw it, aisle 13. It was different from the others. While aisles 1 through 12 and 14 through 25 were standard length, aisle 13 seemed to stretch impossibly far, a direct, uninterrupted line to the back wall of the store. It was a perfect shortcut. A strange flickering stutter in the overhead lights gave the aisle a nervous, unwelcoming pulse. It was also completely, utterly empty. No stray carts, no promotional displays, not even a single employee stocking shelves. It was a dead space, a corridor of forgotten goods. The sign above it, in the store's cheerful blue and yellow font, simply read, "Specialty and Imported Goods." A flicker of unease went through him, the primal instinct that warns you away from dark alleys and quiet woods, but it was quickly overridden by the logic of an exhausted father on a mission. It was faster. It would cut 5 minutes off this trip. With a weary sigh, dismissing the feeling as a product of his sleep-deprived mind, David Miller turned his cart and headed down the flickering, strangely empty aisle. The first thing he noticed was the products. They were odd. The shelves were packed neatly, but the brands were alien, the names seemingly pulled from a fever dream. A box of cereal called Galactus O's featured a cartoon of a planet-devouring cosmic entity. Next to it was a jar of Aunt Mildred's regretful jam, its label showing a sepia-toned photo of a sad-looking woman staring out a window. He saw cans of Silent Spring bottled water and shrink-wrapped packages of Yesterday's Promises. It was bizarre, like a parody of a real grocery store. He chuckled uneasily, assuming it was some failed hipster marketing campaign. He kept walking, pushing his squeaky-wheeled cart, his eyes fixed on the distant back wall where the pharmacy section should be. He expected to see the end of the aisle, the cross-section leading to the health and wellness department, but it remained a distant vanishing point. He walked past sections for condensed emotions and dehydrated memories. The air in the aisle felt still and heavy, the ambient hum of the store fading into a thick, oppressive silence. After what felt like a solid minute of determined walking, he glanced at the shelves again. Aunt Mildred's regretful jam. Silent Spring bottled water. He stopped, the cart's wheel giving one final, pathetic squeak. He had passed these same products moments ago. His heart gave a hard thump against his ribs. A sense of vertigo washed over him. He must have zoned out, his tired mind playing tricks on him. He turned the cart around, a knot of irritation tightening in his stomach. Fine, he would go back and take the long way. He started walking toward the main aisle he'd just left, his pace faster now. He walked and walked, the fluorescent lights strobing above him in their unsteady rhythm. But the entrance to the aisle didn't get any closer. He looked up at the shelves beside him. Galactus O's. He was right back where he started. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of his exhaustion. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. He abandoned the cart and strode to the shelf, intending to cut through a gap to the perceived safety of aisle 12. He reached for a large box of nostalgia wafers, its packaging of faded 1970s orange. He pushed it aside, expecting to see the colorful bags of potato chips on the other side. Instead, his fingers met a solid, cold, seamless surface. Concrete. He pushed again, frantically shoving products off the shelf. Behind the facade of consumer goods was a solid, windowless, featureless wall. He scrambled to the other side of the aisle, knocking over a display of canned echoes. The result was the same, a solid, impenetrable wall. Aisle 13 wasn't an aisle. It was a sealed corridor, a concrete tomb disguised as a retail space. A strangled gasp escaped his lips. His first instinct, the modern man's prayer, was to reach for his phone. He pulled his iPhone from his pocket, his thumb swiping desperately at the screen. The top left corner read, "No service." He tried the store's Wi-Fi. The network list was empty. The screen, for a terrifying second, flickered, the familiar grid of apps dissolving into a storm of static before reforming around a single glitching image, the cheerful, smiling sun of the Megamart logo, its grin now looking like a malicious, mocking sneer. The aisle had cut him off from the world. He was trapped. The panic was a physical thing now, a wild bird thrashing in his chest. He banged his fists against the cold concrete hidden behind the shelves, the sound immediately swallowed by the aisle's profound silence. He shouted for help, his voice raw and desperate, but the words felt dead as soon as they left his mouth, absorbed by the endless rows of nonsensical products. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. And then he wasn't. He saw her at the far end of the aisle, or what he perceived as the far end. She was a woman, seemingly plucked from a 1950s television show. She wore a floral print dress, a string of pearls, and a perfectly coiffed hairdo. Her form, however, was faint, translucent, like an old photograph left in the sun. She pushed an empty, silent shopping cart, her movements slow and graceful. Her eyes, vacant and unfocused, were fixed on a shelf of canned laughter, her hand hovering as if she had been about to make a choice for the last 70 years. Before he could process the sight, another figure materialized. A man in a boxy 1990s business suit, his shoulders padded, his tie slightly askew. He was gaunt, almost skeletal, his skin having the same ghostly see-through quality. He stood paralyzed, his hands clutching two identical cans of distilled ambition, his face a mask of agonizing indecision. They were the patrons, the other shoppers trapped in this retail limbo. "Hey," David yelled, his voice cracking. "Hey, can you help me? Do you know the way out?" He ran towards them, his desperation overriding the sheer strangeness of it all. As he got closer, he saw more of them. A teenage boy in flannel, forever staring at a bag of instant popularity. A young woman in a flapper dress, her ghostly fingers tracing the label on a bottle of liquid courage. They were from different eras, different decades, all prisoners of the same aisle. He reached the housewife and tried to touch her arm. His hand passed right through her, the sensation like plunging his arm into icy water. She didn't react. She didn't even blink. She just continued her ghostly, eternal deliberation over the canned laughter. He tried screaming in the businessman's face, waving his hands, pleading. The man's gaze never wavered from his two identical cans. They were echoes, phantoms caught in an infinite loop of unfulfilled consumer desire, forever shopping for a product that could never fix the real problem. It was then that the music started. It wasn't the store's usual bland, inoffensive music. This was different. It filtered into the aisle from some unseen speaker, a warped and distorted jingle. The melody was vaguely upbeat, but it was played just slightly too slow, the pitch dragging in a way that made the hairs on David's arms stand up. A cheerful, disembodied voice sang, the words slurring together. "For the hole in your heart, for a brand new start, grab a box of complacency pops today." The jingle looped over and over, a maddening, hypnotic earworm designed to soothe, to pacify, to make him forget why he was panicking. It was the aisle's muzak, a lullaby for the damned, and as it burrowed into his brain, he felt a strange, placid confusion begin to settle over him, dulling the sharp edges of his fear. Fighting against the tranquilizing effect of the looping jingle, David began to realize that the aisle wasn't just a static prison. It was a responsive, interactive entity. It was a labyrinth that changed its shape based on his state of mind. A powerful wave of desperation hit him. He thought of Lily, her small body burning with fever, her weak voice calling his name. He had to get to her. He had to get out. With a surge of adrenaline, he picked a direction, back towards the front of the store, and ran. He sprinted, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart hammering. But the more he ran, the more the aisles seemed to stretch before him. The entrance, a distant rectangle of normal light, receded into the distance, like a mirage in a desert. The aisle was feeding on his urgency, using his desperation as fuel to lengthen itself. Exhausted and defeated, he stopped, leaning against a shelf stocked with powdered dreams. He slumped to the floor, hopelessness washing over him. What was the point? It was impossible. He was trapped. As he surrendered to his despair, a strange thing happened. The bizarre products on the shelves around him began to pulse with a faint, inviting internal light. Their labels seemed to become clearer, their promises more seductive. The aisle didn't want him to run, it wanted him to shop. He forced himself to his feet and began to examine the products, not as random junk, but as clues. Bottled Monday morning feeling, instant forgiveness, just add water. A moment's peace, family size. He finally understood. The aisle wasn't stocking goods, it was stocking solutions. It manifested products that represented the abstract desires, the deep-seated anxieties, and the unfulfilled wishes of the people it trapped. The 1950s housewife wasn't looking for a joke, she was looking for happiness. The 90s businessman wasn't choosing a drink, he was choosing a path to success. The patrons were forever searching for a tangible product that would fix their intangible internal suffering. That was the trap. That was the twisted, consumerist logic of this place. Suddenly, a flash of movement at the far end of the aisle. A real, solid person. It was the night manager, a young man with a weary, almost unnervingly calm expression. He was methodically stocking a shelf, his movements unhurried. Hope, fierce and blinding, erupted in David's chest. "Help! Hey, help me!" David screamed, waving his arms frantically. The night manager stopped his work. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at David, his eyes holding not a flicker of surprise or alarm. He saw David's terror, his desperate plea. For a moment, David thought he would come, that he would unlock some hidden door. Instead, the manager's expression softened into one of weary, profound pity. He gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head, a silent, heartbreaking gesture that confirmed everything. "I know where you are, and I can do nothing for you." Then he turned back to his work, calmly placing a can of something on the shelf, leaving David alone once more with the ghosts and the labyrinth. The aisle now knew him. It had his scent. As David stared in horror at the spot where the manager had been, the products on the shelves nearest to him began to shift and change, their labels shimmering like heat haze. When the transformation was complete, they were no longer generic anxieties. They were his. He saw a family-sized box of cereal labeled "More Time." The cartoon on the front was of a smiling father playing catch with his daughter, the sun frozen forever in the sky. Further down, there were guilt-free work-life balance bars, promising the energy to excel at his job while never missing the school play. He saw cans of mortgage payment relief stacked in a perfect pyramid and bottles of undiluted ambition that looked suspiciously like the ones the ghostly businessman had been holding. The aisle was mining his deepest insecurities and turning them into merchandise. Then he saw it. It sat alone on a single shelf, perfectly illuminated by a soft, focused spotlight that seemed to come from nowhere. It was a small, simple, unassuming bottle of clear liquid, the kind that might hold eye drops or a child's medicine. The label was plain white, with simple black text. It read, "Lily's Laughter." An overwhelming, irrational desire seized him. It was a physical pull, a magnetic force emanating from the bottle. He could almost hear it, that pure, bell-like sound of his daughter's unrestrained joy. The memory of the real mission, the grape-flavored fever reducer, began to feel distant and fuzzy, a trivial detail from another life. This bottle, this felt essential. This was the real cure. It would fix more than just a fever. It would fix the worry, the guilt, the fear of not being a good enough father. His hand trembled as he reached for it. The aisle hummed with a pleased, expectant energy. He was succumbing, being integrated into its predatory logic. His purpose was being overwritten, his selfless mission replaced by a selfish, manufactured desire. As his fingers were about to close around the small bottle, he happened to glance down at his hand in the strange focused light. He froze. He could see the faint outline of the shelf through his skin. His hand was becoming translucent, the edges blurring, fading into the background. A wave of cold terror, colder than anything he had felt before, washed over him. He was becoming a patron. He was fading away, his original purpose being consumed, digested, and turned into another ghostly echo forever shopping in aisle 13. In that final, desperate moment of near surrender, as his very essence seemed to be draining away, his hand, the one not reaching for the bottle of Lily's laughter, brushed against his jeans pocket. He felt the familiar, crumpled texture of a piece of paper. The sensation was jarringly real, a tactile intrusion from a world he was rapidly forgetting. With a final gargantuan effort of will, he pulled his other hand back from the tempting bottle and fumbled in his pocket. He pulled out a small, wrinkled receipt. No, not a receipt. It was the grocery list Sarah had scribbled for him before he'd left. A simple, real, mundane object from the outside world. He unfolded it. The paper was thin, the blue lines faded, and on it, in his wife's familiar, slightly slanted handwriting, was one item, just one. Lily's fever reducer, grape. The words were an anchor in a sea of illusion. They were concrete. They were real. They were not a metaphor or a symbol. They were a direct instruction, an order born of love and necessity. This tangible, real-world mission, this simple, selfless act of care, sliced through the aisle's psychological haze like a searchlight cutting through fog. He remembered, not the abstract desire for more time or a guilt-free life, but the real, urgent need of his daughter. He wasn't here for bottled dreams or Lily's laughter. He was here for grape-flavored medicine for his very real, feverish child. His purpose, which had been dissolving, suddenly solidified. The translucent quality of his hands vanished, his skin becoming opaque and solid once more. As his focus sharpened, the illusion around him seemed to flicker and weaken. The inviting glow from the products dimmed. The hypnotic jingle faltered, the audio track skipping like a scratched record. In that moment of clarity, he understood the aisle's weakness. It fed on abstract, unfulfilled desire. It trapped consumers who were shopping for a feeling, for a solution to an internal problem. It had no power over a simple, concrete, and selfless goal. In this moment, with this list in his hand, David Miller was not a consumer. He was a caregiver. He was a father. And that made him an anomaly, a fatal error in the aisle's predatory system. Clutching the crumpled grocery list like a holy relic, David turned his back on the bottle of Lily's laughter and began to walk. He didn't run. He walked with a steady, unbreakable rhythm toward the entrance of the aisle, his eyes locked on the rectangle of normal, steady light in the distance. He ignored the shelves now, ignoring the whispering promises of instant forgiveness and the pleading, empty faces of the patrons who drifted past him like smoke. He focused on a single, powerful mantra, the words from the list: Lily's medicine, grape flavor. The aisle knew it was losing him, and it fought back. The flickering lights went berserk, strobing violently in a disorienting, epileptic rhythm. The air grew thick and cold, a palpable pressure against his skin. The floor beneath his feet seemed to tilt and warp, trying to throw him off balance. The shelves, which had maintained their polite distance, now seemed to press in, narrowing the path, trying to block his escape. The psychological assault intensified. The jingle warped into a demonic roar. Whisper slithered around him, using his own voice to list his deepest fears. You're a bad father. You work too much. You'll never be enough. The patrons became more solid, their ghostly forms coalescing into desperate, pleading figures. The housewife reached out a cold, transparent hand, her mouth open in a silent scream. The businessman stepped in front of him, his face a mask of anguish, holding out the cans of distilled ambition as if they were a sacrament. It was a full-blown attack on his focus, a final, desperate attempt to make him stop, to make him want something from its shelves. But the list in his hand was his shield, Lily's medicine. He pushed past the ghostly figures. He kept his balance on the tilting floor. He ignored the whispers. He walked. With every step, the aisle's power over him waned. The strobing lights steadied, the whispers faded. The patrons dissolved back into faint, translucent echoes. He was nearing the entrance, the real world just feet away. With one final shuddering gasp, the illusion shattered. The endless corridor snapped back to its normal, finite length. He stumbled out of aisle 13 and into the main concourse of the megamart, falling to his knees and gasping for air. He was back in reality. The humming of the freezers was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He looked back at the entrance to aisle 13. It now looked completely, utterly ordinary. Its sign for specialty and imported goods glowing with mundane cheerfulness. Shaking and disoriented, David scrambled to his feet. He ran, his cart forgotten, to the back of the store. He found the real pharmacy aisle, aisle 24, bright, clean, and blessedly normal. There it was, Reductor Children's Fever Reducer, great flavor. He snatched the box from the shelf, his hands trembling so badly he almost dropped it. He sprinted to the front of the store, to the single checkout lane that was open. The night manager was there, waiting, his expression as placid and unreadable as ever. David placed the medicine on the counter, his breathing still ragged. The manager scanned the item without a word, the beep of the register a comforting sound of normalcy. "That'll be $12.99, he said, his voice flat. David paid, his mind reeling. As the manager handed him the small plastic bag with the medicine inside, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting David's. There was a flicker of something in them. Pity, understanding, maybe even respect. "Glad you found what you were looking for," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The drive home was a blur. When he burst through the door, Sarah rushed to him, her face etched with panic and relief. "David, where have you been? I was about to call the police. You've been gone for over 3 hours." 3 hours? To him, it had felt like 30, maybe 40 minutes at most. The time dilation had been real. He mumbled something about a flat tire, unable to form the words to explain the truth. He gave Lily the medicine, watching as she finally drifted into a peaceful, less troubled sleep. The next morning, Lily's fever had broken. She was sitting up in bed, coloring, her familiar laughter filling the house. David, feeling a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix, tried to process the night's events, desperately trying to convince himself it had all been a stress-induced hallucination. He was in the kitchen unpacking the small plastic bag from the Megamart. He took out the box of medicine and the receipt. But there was something else inside, a small, unfamiliar object he had no memory of buying, no memory of seeing at the checkout. It was a small, simple glass bottle with a plain white label, identical to the one he had almost picked up from the shelf. He had escaped, but not empty-handed. He had a souvenir. With a trembling hand, he read the stark, typewritten words on the label. It didn't say Lily's laughter. It said, "Aisle 13. Item, 1-1 fear of loss. Price, 1 hour." He stared at the impossible object, the proof in his hand that his experience had been terrifyingly real. He looked from the bottle to his daughter in the living room, her laughter now the genuine article, priceless and pure. He understood. The aisle had taken something from him, a piece of time, a shard of his sanity. But because he had clung to his selfless purpose, it had, in its own twisted way, completed the transaction. It had let him go. David walked calmly to the kitchen trash can, the small bottle feeling cold in his hand. He dropped it in, the clink of glass against plastic, a final, quiet punctuation mark. It was a silent promise to himself, a new rule to live by. Never again go shopping for anything that you can't find on a list. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.